Years ago, a professor of New York University, Myron Watkins, wrote a book about oil. And he wrote that the problem of oil is that there is always too much or too little. Now, I could actually, 81 years later, say the same about renewables. Is there too much sunshine or too little? Is there too much wind or too little? Is there too much being generated or too little? Is there too much money available that we don't know, that we don't have adequate projects to deploy into? Or are there too many projects available with too little money to deploy into them? As we just heard, there are quite a few risks that not just India, but other countries are also facing. Of course, they vary in their impact from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We could argue, is there too little regulation to solve for some of the market failures that would be needed to drive the energy transition? Or is there too much regulation? And of course, as David just mentioned, is there now too little investment in technology? Some of the technologies, of course, are on track, but many are not. This session is designed to expand our minds beyond just the kind of India-centric challenges that challenges and solutions we've been hearing about through the day, to get a sense that we are not alone in the world. We might be one of the locomotives driving the clean energy transition, but to understand this transition better, we need to understand the surpluses or the deficits of the resource or the risks in a more holistic manner. So without further ado, I'm going to call upon the stage the speakers. Vibhuti Garg from IISD, please come forward. Mr. Praveen Kumar from MNRE. Poonam Sandhu from the Natural Resources Defense Council. Mr. Narendra Taneja, the convener of the Energy Cell for the Bharatiya Janata Party. And of course, Mr. David Turk from the International Energy Agency. I'm going to start with Mr. Taneja. You heard, sir, about both the good news that India is one of the critical countries driving the clean energy transition. You also heard about several risks that India faces. And you also heard, when Mr. Praveen Kumar was speaking, how India is trying to respond to it. If we were to actually take the story of India to the rest of the world, what would we say? What's been our approach towards risks affecting the energy transition, and how have we dealt with it? What would be the narrative?
Well, when you look at the story of renewables in India, pre-2014 and post-2014, I think I'll focus more on post-2014. It's a lot to talk about in terms of political will, in terms of governance of renewable energy, in terms of agendas, in terms of ambitions and aspirations. I think if you look at it, where we have succeeded, and as like many others in this room, I also travel all over the world all the time, practically. And I think that if what I have seen in India, in a very short period of just 4 years, how renewable has become a grassroots movement. I mean, you go to even small towns these days, and if they get to know that you know a little bit about energy, they start asking questions about solar. They want to know how can they, invest in become a solar entrepreneur, set up a business, or buy a panel, or somehow connect with solar energy and contribute. And I think this is, if you ask me, a story that we need to share with the rest of the world. That how in such a short period of time, and that this has now become actually such a strong, such a robust and sustainable movement at the grassroots level. And this is being, of course, led by the government, and our Prime Minister in particular, but I think now people have adopted it. Now this has become a people's movement. And this is a story which I don't think has yet been shared with the rest of the world. That, of course, it helps if you're a democracy. And of course, in a way, it helps if you are really energy starved. But I think here the role which renewables has plays, that look, if you have the right political direction and right policies in place and right incentives in place, and at the highest level, if you really can effectively convey to people, look, we mean it, and it's something we want to do for you, the ordinary people, the ordinary consumer, and how can we change your life? Just imagine a household in a remote part of India, Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or Jharkhand or Assam or Odisha, Bengal, wherever, especially in northern part of the country, in eastern part of the country, where the moment sun goes down, they're actually back to the Stone Age, practically. If not Stone Age, at least the 15th century. And the only difference is that there is a different form of government. And with just little help and technology and the right policy incentive, in no time, they have access to energy, they have solar energy, they have access to technology, and at the same time, this is something that they very easily connect with. They want to set up clusters, they want to set up their own grid, they want to know more, women want to participate in it. I met women, they just want to have a women-only solar power cooperative. They want to know how can the government help, and if you can send some people from Delhi or Lucknow, wherever, in order to train them. So that kind of initiative. I mean, when I go to the ground and you go yourself and see it, experience yourself, how people are willing to take initiative. All they want from the government or whosoever is willing to help, some kind of support in terms of training to put things in place, microfinance, and the rest they say will take care of it. And when I look at renewable energy in India, particularly in case of India, I think that's the way forward. And that is something we need to organize a little bit more, put the structures in place, create modules, and especially the models when it comes to financing and training, and and basically say that how can we transform the country. When I look at India's economy as a whole, we still need to do more in terms of transforming rural economy. And that's the focus of the government. Rural economy, and I personally believe based on my experience, that you really cannot achieve the complete transformation of rural economy without transforming the energy sector first and foremost. And I think the best way forward is just put in place solar, power centers, solar energy in such a way where the lead is taken by the people, is managed by the people, the tariffs are fixed by the people, and based on that solar power, they can set up neo and small industries, so that the rural areas, rural households are not only about agriculture, they're also about industry, they're also about manufacturing. And there, solar has already begun to play a role, but the story has just begun. And as he said that, I'll just take one more minute, that you see, when it comes to the overall renewable energy, and especially, I think a governance model is already emerging. And governance does not necessarily mean that is something has to be governed only by the government. My personal belief when you look at the history of energy in the world, so far energy has been very much government driven. But I think that one thing, or one sector, or one initiative, one revolution, which is going to change it forever, is going to be solar. Solar is going to completely change the way we look at energy governance, whether at the domestic level or international level. Gradually, energy sector will actually move away from the government. And maybe in 30 years from now, 40 years from now, we may not need a power ministry, a ministry of renewable energy, because the people will take over. Markets will take over. People's energy will take over. And I think India will be among the first country where this might happen. So I think there's a lot happening, much more than what we are able to see. So governance is going to be the key thing. And I think in the solar, what I'm seeing is governance initiative in terms of governance is also being seized by the people, by this movement. And same is going to look at what's happening in oil. And since we are so heavily dependent on oil in terms of our requirement, 83% of total requirement is imported. And look what's happening in terms of energy governance globally. Just two countries, Saudi Arabia and Russia. They monopolized everything. Where is freedom of market? What happens to the governance? We have global climate governance in place, thanks to the Paris deal. But can you really move forward in climate governance, global governance, without having global energy governance in place first. There is no global energy governance order as such. There is none. There are several organizations. There are OPEC. They still behave sometime like a king in the 16th century. And then you have, some other organizations. And of course, I'm sitting next to a gentleman who is from IEA. They've done some good work, but it's still, they're very focused on OECD and the developed countries. And then we have got International Energy Forum. We have India, France taking initiative to create International Solar Alliance, but which is not for governance, by the way. And among other things, there's more for the market and more for the industry. So I think there's a lot that we need to do. And I think now that the global energy gravity center has firmly moved from the Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific, where India and China need to play a bigger role. And I think one of the first initiatives they should take is that how can we really learn from what is happening already in the ground. I'm not much in favor of, creating very fancy organization or having fancy ideas and fancy this thing. I believe when it comes to renewable energy, people have now, government took the lead, but now people are gradually actually seizing that. They want to take initiative. All they want from us and from the government and from others, some kind of support. And I think this is a fantastic moment. As I said, since there is no global energy governance order in place, I think the people have now taken the lead. Markets, in a way, we have seen when market takes what happened unless it's properly governed. Oil, for instance, is not properly governed since there was no international order, and we are seeing the kind of mayhem that we are watching now. So I think, but what is going to change the global energy scenario completely, that would be by the renewable energy. And I think India has, in a way, shown that what can be done. And the great and the fantastic part of the India story, that probably we can share with the world, that please go and see what's happening on the ground. Yes, the Prime Minister took the lead. Yes, our party took the lead. Yes, the government took the lead. But look at the role that people have played. And it's the people's movement, and I think people are going to show us even further and eventually guide. You know why people are taking the initiative? Why they have adopted it? Because they think it's something they easily connect with. Unlike the conventional energy where you need to have big bureaucracy, sorry, I didn't mean any negative way, but a big bureaucracy or the government, and then you have international organizations and all that here is simple and is pure. So renewable energy is simple and pure. That connects directly with the people. Let people take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taneja. I think you've set the objective right. Say within the next 30 years, we're going to make all of ourselves redundant. But between now and the next 30 years, there is a problem. And the problem is that the money does not flow where the sun shines the most or the wind blows the hardest. So if this people's movement had to really take off, how can we actually recognize not just the positive moves that are happening in emerging economies like India, but understand the commonality of challenges across these emerging economies, across the countries between the tropics? So Poonam, I'm going to come to you. Is this approach of pooling risks to then reduce the cost of finance one way we could be doing this? Or are there other ways in which these common risks that we saw across countries that could be managed?
So I'm going to take it from the perspective of financing, the risks that financial institutions face. Pooling risks is a well-known concept for financial institutions and financing. And so too in the renewable sector, especially in the smaller projects. And that's where we really feel that attention is required. There are a lot of, or rather the financing has been flowing towards large-scale grid-integrated projects. And this decentralized small projects, which seems to be actually a trend even across economies, are the ones that require attention. They face the common classic problems of financing small projects, and solution of pooling risks by financial institutions, pooling portfolios of small projects which are diversified across geographies, across technologies, can help in growing the market, which we can, in a sense, call underserved, which is other than the large grid-connected project, solar project market.
You use the term underserved. Now, I'm going to switch to Vibhuti. You work a lot on subsidies. Now, subsidies trigger the kind of investment flow that we want in the right direction to support, again, the people's movement, so to speak.
Right. So when we were talking about the risks in this clean energy transition, I think subsidies definitely play a key role. When we talk about subsidies, if you would have looked at the various forms of government intervention. So before I talk about subsidies, I want to talk about there are two key big other level of government support which has helped, fossil fuels versus renewables more. The first and the foremost is the public finance, which we have talked about in the previous discussions, and Poonam also was talking about the financing. If you look at financing from the public sector, both commercial and the non-commercial organizations like PFC, REC, they have been given finances to the coal sector at a very preferential rates. And if you look at a very recent study by CFA in the year 2017, the exposure from these banks to the coal sector was about 73%, whereas, the renewables got a very small chunk of share of financing from these public sector banks. So despite the falling prices in the renewable sector and despite the huge targets which we have set forth, these public sector banks still perceive renewables a little more riskier and vis-a-vis coal, and they're still refinancing the already construction or the stress assets. So that's a glaring risk which I think needs to be addressed going forward. Secondly is the policy delays which we have seen. For example, one clear example is of environmental norm compliance. So the delays have led to huge advantage for, again, coal versus renewables, because we had this discussion with CA very recently, and they have just staggered plant-wise compliance of norms, and now the timelines have shifted from earlier from 2017 to 19, and now it's 2022, and there are different timelines for different plants. And the kind of cost implications this has is like 40 to 50 paisa increase if they have to comply for those SOx and NOx norms. Again, coal then again stands at an advantage vis-a-vis renewables. And again, these are the kind of government support which has been kind of extended to fossil fuels versus renewable. Third, and the most important, are the subsidies. After a decade of research at GSI on the size and the impact of subsidies, we feel they do act as a barrier to renewable energy, and they help in developing an energy system which is very fossil fuel dominated. So when we look at subsidies, the way we qualify subsidies are any subsidies that are given as direct expenditure, tax breaks, income support, or a market price support, which helps in promoting a particular sector more, and the government feels that this is required to boost economic activity as well as for more and more job creation, which is completely understandable. But I think the key issue is, are these subsidies supporting sustainable development, the kind of objective function which you were talking about in the previous section? So I think the way we look at things is we need an energy system that supports sustainable development. So definitely energy is key for any development, but is it happening in a more sustainable manner? So that's where the problem lies. And given that we have seen last year GSI came out with a report on measuring subsidies. We do a bottoms-up approach. We analyze every policy to understand where the government is supporting each of the different fuels in the energy mix. So we measure it from for coal, for oil and gas, for renewables. And if you make a comparison between the kind of subsidies that the government has given to renewables versus coal or oil and gas, is like stark difference. And even though renewables share has gone up, but if you compare with oil and gas or coal, it's still much, much higher. The subsidies, I think the important issue is then how do we kind of resolve them? One of the ways in which we think subsidies can help in building more sustainable energy system and the government can do is an energy swap. So when I say energy swap is basically what I mean is reallocating, the savings from the fossil fuel subsidy reforms and using it for more and more clean energy development, whether it's renewable energy, it's energy efficiency, or it is public transportation. Just to add a caveat, when I talk about renewable energy, yes, we have seen the prices have gone down. So we have addressed one aspect of the problem in the value chain, but I think there are other issues when, in order to make the renewables more and more reliable, we need to invest, or there's a government support that is required in terms of storage because it's still very expensive, or the issues related to grid integration. So any support which can further, make the renewable energy system more reliable is the way we would want to look at things now. In India, for example, we can do a kerosene to solar swap because kerosene is still kerosene kind of mitigate being a low cost fuel, despite, just because the government has been supporting subsidies. So we have seen this example in Zambia where, there's so much reliance on diesel-based generation, and even in countries like Indonesia, again, there's so much of coal dominance. And if we are able to reform the level of subsidies, we have seen the same trends in both the countries like India, that the subsidies to fossil fuels are much, much higher. So if we can do a transitioning away from these fuels to clean energy, definitely we would see lower prices and cleaner air, and over time it would be much, much more affordable to all the households.
Sure, and I think in the last few years there has been, while the overall quantum of subsidies might still be tilted towards fossils, I think there has been a significant amount of effort both through sort of behavioral nudges as well as direct targeting of subsidies to the poorest households to reform some of these, especially in the cooking energy side. So Mr. Praveen Kumar, I'm going to come back to you because in your opening address you outlined not just the big ambitions, but step by step what the ministry was trying to do. But through the day, one of the questions that has arisen again and again is who bears what kind of risk? And so it seems to be that we have a general consensus of the direction of travel we want to go to. We also have general consensus of the types of risks impacting all of us. Now, how much, and again what Ms. Taneja was saying, how much should be the government's role and how much is it governance and transparency, etc., that gives us confidence to invest? So what kind of risks rests with you for you to mitigate, and what kind of risks should the developer assume as normal business practice?
I think the presentation made by, what is his name? Manu, on the various categories of risk. I think he had color coded it, what could be done by the developer and what could the state. The basic principle should be that if any initiative which is beyond the, normal imagination of a developer, that government should take care, because some risks you can take care through your business practices. Suppose there's a fire risk, you can always take an insurance. So you are taking care of that. So there are models where we are, as a business, there are business models where risks are taken care of. But there are some risks which is beyond the developer. Suppose a safeguard duty comes. It's not in the hand of the developer. Because he can't do, there is no insurance for safeguard. Perhaps, I don't know, there's a model you can develop a duty risk insurance or something. I don't know, that can become a new instrument. IRI can be asked to that. So those risks government should come forward to try to ameliorate that. Problem happens when you have a bid-based process, tender-based process. Now, in a system which I say is very transparent and everything, so tender conditions are laid down upfront. Now, if any agency, government agency, or even goes beyond the tender conditions to help a developer after the tender is over, I mean after you have won the bid, then the chances of allegations of collusion and trying to help one person who has won the tender is always there. So the best thing is to anticipate most of the things upfront, put in the tender conditions, whatever you can, see what you can cover, and like you say, like force majeure conditions. You can analyze and say that okay, that can be taken care of. So that way you will try to have a balance. It has to be a balanced approach. It can't be that all profits are mine and all risks government should take care of. That can't be an approach that okay, any risk is there, you come to a solution, give us additional subsidy, give us additional tariff. That can't be there. So it has to be a balanced kind of approach. And generally, if you see in all the lists, clearly you can say what are the things which government has to provide for, and mention it upfront before even tendering. That these are the things where we can take care if there's some changes occur. Like in fossil fuel, if the coal price goes up, oil price goes up, it's factored in the tender conditions. Variable price is linked to the international oil price or coal price. Similar thing, suppose I said duty is a major thing which affects the price during the implement. And other thing which is which affects the returns is luckily for renewables everything is fixed cost. The variable cost is very minimal. So whatever is there is invested in the beginning, and the returns come, and returns are only affected by perhaps if you have a foreign funding source by the foreign exchange rate. I mean that can be, there are instruments to cover that. So what I will say as a model is where there are international or national instruments to cover those risks, that the developer should work for that. Which are not covered, government should try to provide a comfort level for that.
Okay, now I'm going to switch back to both Mr. Taneja and Mr. Turk for a reason. A lot of what we've been hearing thus far is how we could potentially mitigate, either through the government or through subsidy reform or through risk pooling for specifically renewable energy projects. Right? But I'm going to pose you a slightly harder question, both of you. Is you are in charge of the energy cell, not just the renewable energy cell, and you are from the International Energy Agency, not the International Renewable Energy Agency. So I'm putting on you the hats of looking at things in a systemic way. Even while we fix the renewable energy related risks, whether it's developer focused or policy focused, how do we manage over this period of transition the risks that cut across the energy sectors, whether it's renewables, coal, oil, gas, because stressed assets are going to be in all these sectors. Political economy of the distribution of jobs, the distribution of investment, all of this is going to impact. And there could be a feedback effect that pushes back against a clean energy transition. So, Mr. Taneja, I know you're a little pressed for time, so I'm going to give you the microphone again first, and then we'll come to David.
I think very interesting question, and I heard very carefully to what Vibhuti had to say. My sense and based on my experience of the sector, both renewables and fossil fuels, is that I think it's very important that we treat renewable as a new planet, as something which has energy, yes, but has nothing to do with fossil fuels. I think it's very important the people who are playing a key role in building architectures for the renewable energy, that they have absolutely no connection, no relationship with the conventional energy. Because if you look at renewable and think in terms of, or subconsciously think in terms of conventional energy, most particularly fossil, you will never ever be able to do justice to renewable energy. Renewable energy needs a different DNA, which is not there yet. And even IEA, they're essentially an oil, it was created out of the oil crisis of the 1970s. So their DNA is actually oil, it's not even natural gas. But now they want to be everywhere, everything. Which probably is not going to work. In my sense, is not going to work. And there will be internal resistance and as well as resistance from outside. So my sense is that, fossil fuels, subsidies, fossil fuel before Second World War and fossil fuels since America became superpower and then the Cold War and all that. I think a subsidy also needs to be investigated and questioned more honestly. When the US decided to invade Iraq, the first Persian Gulf War, and again the second Persian Gulf War, did they do it because they didn't like the face of Saddam Hussein? No. They spent trillions of dollars in the two Gulf Wars to secure cheap oil. Was not that subsidy? Trillions spent by America and Western countries on the Middle East for that war. That was subsidy. Subsidy to secure cheap oil for their consumers. What else? What else? And when it comes to coal and what is happening now, let's say, to unconventional oil and gas in Canada, kind of support they get, or the kind of support now shale is getting from President Trump, what is that? So the question is that, but at the same time, we have to be realistic. Energy transition in some countries is going to be faster than other countries. In countries like Switzerland or maybe Norway and Sweden, it may probably be a reality maybe in 20 years. But in countries like India, energy transition is going to take a long time, probably 50 years, maybe even more, maybe 60. So we have to respond accordingly. Right now, the fact is that oil is central to India's economy and economic growth. Natural gas will emerge very soon, in 15 years from now, and play a central role to India's energy mix. Coal, we have decided we are not going to build any further coal-fired power plants. I don't know if it's a good idea. You see, the point is that we want energy security and we want to reduce our dependence on Saudi Arabia or OPEC countries for oil. We've switched to renewables, but our dependence on China is 90% when it comes to equipment. Is that not, are we not making ourselves vulnerable in terms of energy security? Instead of depending 83%, is 90%. So question is that, that's what I said, that we have to be realistic. We should not be green ayatollahs or renewable ayatollah, solar ayatollah. We have to be realistic. We have to organize and mobilize energy for 1.30 billion people, not only for people like you and me sitting in this room. We still have 70% people below energy poverty line. It's a fact. Now the question is that, so that's what I said. In India, we need more coal. We need more oil. We need more natural gas. We need more uranium too. And we need more solar, more wind, more future energy, more biogas, everything. We need everything. Now, so therefore it is important that we build our policy architectures and other things accordingly for us first, for India first. If our architectures, policies are useful to other countries, welcome it. Very good idea. But I think we have to focus on our people, 1.30 billion people, and see that how can we make sure they have access to energy. So therefore I said that, even when we go to conferences like Paris, we should be negotiating even more strongly. We should go well prepared so that we can, put up our case more strongly. So therefore it is important that, as I said, that we need to see we have got good reserves of coal. What do we do with them? How can we use them in such a way that we don't contaminate much? We don't, but we can still use them so that we can reduce our dependence. At the same time, as I said, the renewable energy, renewable business, renewable ministry even, it should be in the hands of the people who have no experience of conventional energy or, especially when it comes to oil, gas and coal. Because you need a different DNA. I think the blunder, it will be a fundamental blunder if we start looking at renewable energy with the DNA of oil, gas and coal. And we look at renewable energy, whether it's policy making or formulation or regulations or subsidy model and all that with that. So I think, in my view, renewable will succeed. I'm talking strictly of India and countries like India, that if we go for a different model, we treat it as a different planet, and because in this particular area, renewable, people, trust me, and I'm not saying because I'm a politician, people are going to play the much bigger role. And they are going to be actually the leader. They're going to be the substance of it and the core of it. Renewable will become a big success. Renewable will occupy the maximum space in India's energy mix only if we think and we formulate policy and we come up with a solution where we let people take the lead and help them build architectures, build policies, big banking system, finance system, and we let them lead. Because it's going to be something where the pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid and even the mid of the pyramid occupied by them. And then by 2070, probably, renewable will be occupy the maximum space in India's energy mix. And to make it sustainable, to make it more workable, to make it something that might even inspire people from other parts of the world, it's important that we focus more. I look around the world, I travel around the world, I don't see any country that we can really go, all right, say, here's the model we can come and copy. No, we will have to build our own architectures, our own thoughts, our own solutions. And I personally feel that's only then we'll be able to secure energy, affordable energy for everyone in the country. 1.30 billion people. It's a huge challenge. It's more than the total population of Africa.
David, last year, India became an associate member of the International Energy Agency, and I know IES had an outreach towards emerging economies. So this tension between the old energy, I wouldn't call it clean versus dirty, it's kind of old energy versus new energy, old business models versus new business model. What's the IES thinking on this when you look beyond India? And look at other emerging economies. How do we manage this transition?
So I think it's an excellent question. I think the first thing I'd underscore is the energy system, as we've known it throughout human civilization, has been changing and transitioning. It's not like we've ever been static. Things have shifted from the dawn of the fire age in terms of different fuels, different technologies over a period of time. I think what's happening right now is an incredibly dynamic era in energy transition. It's complicated. It's driven in part by purposeful government intervention. The Paris Agreement, the need for the world to get a handle on our GHG emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions is one example. The political imperative on air pollution, the need to bring energy access being so critical, as my colleague was saying, to all of daily life. So there's a purposeful part that's speeding up and accelerating this energy transition over the course of this next window period of time. There's also broader societal forces that are acting upon all of us. So digitalization is one example. A lot of the digital technologies out there are enabling different tools, different abilities to help shape, to help the transition, and frankly will drive the transition regardless of what government policy wants to do in certain areas as well. So I think what we're entering is a period of incredible dynamicism. Energy transition, or we like the term energy transitions because not every country will go through the same transition, is the incredibly, I think the sort of gravity, center of gravity for energy, the energy world more generally over the next certainly several years and several decade period of time. It's also incredibly complicated. This isn't easy to figure out how to navigate the energy transition to achieve these societal objectives. So let me just give you one example of that. We've done some work on digitalization in energy and the intersection of all this ICT technology with energy, and what does that mean going forward? One area we looked at in particular was what happens in the transport sector when we have the shared mobility model, the Uber-Lyft mobility model, coming together with automated mobility, which is happening, the technology's advancing, and electrification, and electric mobility. What you see is you have some estimates that all of these technologies can bring about huge efficiency improvements, platooning, real-time traffic data, et cetera, to the point where you could decrease your energy use from passenger vehicles by half if you take more optimistic assumptions of how all this comes together. You could also have a huge rebound effect, in that if we all have our individual vehicles that are automated, you don't have to drive yourself, a computer's driving for you, the safety's improved. The rebound effect, some estimates have, is energy use could actually double because of these technologies. So you could either half your energy use or double your energy use, and how are policymakers supposed to navigate that going forward? To me, the answer on the energy transitions front is you can't look at any of these technologies or sectors in isolation. There really is a confluence of all of these, largely happening in the electricity sector. The grid is where a lot of these things come together, whether in national grids, regional grids, microgrids. The electricity space is where the action is going to be. It's where the electric vehicles are going to plug in, hopefully through smart charging. It's where integration of renewables comes in, especially solar and wind, smart demand response, all those kinds of features. And it's going to be incredibly challenging for policymakers to help to navigate that energy transitions, to drive that energy transitions and harness and channel these tools for decarbonization, air pollution, energy access, all the objectives that governments have with them. From the IA side of things, one thing that we're focusing on more and more is really becoming an energy transitions agency that helps governments around the world, and very importantly, India. It was referenced already, the fact that the center of gravity for the energy world is shifting to Asia, shifting to India, shifting to China. Our numbers show that anytime we look at where the renewables trends are, where other trends are in the energy space more generally. It's no secret why our executive director, Fatih Birol, is coming to India so often, having meetings. We have this association partnership. We hope that develops and deepens over time. It's really going to be critical for governments like India to successfully navigate this energy transition, to succeed on providing all the services energy needs to for the citizens, for the people of India, for the people in other countries around the world. And certainly the thing we see from the IA side is to help these countries think things through. We're an all-of-energy agency. If you're going to figure out an energy transition, you've got to know how all of these pieces fit together, and that's where we've got some comparative advantage, and we really are looking forward to working with the Indian government more generally. The last thing I'd say is political certainty or political uncertainty. In democracies in particular, we have elections. That's a good thing. That's the way we're responsive to our citizenry, responsive to our bosses, if you will. For the energy transition to be successful, to be efficient, to make sense financially, we've got to have the kind of broad-based constituent support, the broad-based citizen support my colleague from BJP was just mentioning, so that there is that level of support, so that even if governments shift over time, there's still a consensus on the transitions, a consensus on the nature of the direction overall. And that's incredibly important, not just from an elite perspective or the government leadership perspective, but frankly for all the citizens in particular countries to benefit from the transitions and to have an ownership and stake in it. And that's going to be a challenge. That's going to be something that we all need to work on.
Let's take some questions from the floor. Dr. Sharma and then Kanika. Kabardeep, could you give the microphone to Dr. Sharma here?
Why energy transition is happening so slow for renewable energy deployment, except for China? Because the total share of RE in total energy is just 3.5%. Also, one very important thing is that we don't hesitate to give subsidies to oil and gas sector, which is currently close to about $4 billion. But to RE, we are providing just $0.75 billion viability gap funding.
Okay, so maybe the question on overall pace of energy transition, India compared to other countries, can be answered by David. And Mr. Kumar, you can answer why MNRE is not garnering more of the subsidy share for India's energy transition.
And especially when you're collecting about 32,000 crores clean energy funds.
In the interest of time, Kanika, why don't you pose your question as well? We'll see if they're related.
Thank you. In part, yes. So the session is called Risks in Renewable Energy Markets and Emerging Economies. And so maybe if you could quickly talk about how are these risks different from risks for renewables in other more developed markets, and how the solutions for these fit for purpose solutions also then need to come up from these countries themselves, and we can't have copy-paste solutions from what's worked in other more developed markets. My specific question on that point, though, is what do you think will be the role not of government or of policy, but of public money in accelerating the pace of transition?
So I'm going to, others can also respond, but since Poonam comes from the Natural Resources Defense Council, which originated at least in the United States, but has a footprint elsewhere. I'm going to direct that question to you. So let's start with India and then expand our horizon. Mr. Kumar, why does renewable still get a small share of the subsidy?
See, subsidy is a catch-22 situation. What happens, actually, a subsidy-led regime often ends up locking up the economy in a non-efficient structure. Many times it happens. But subsidy has a need. I personally feel, it's my personal opinion, that subsidy has need at two places. That one, when you are opening a new technology. Normally, most of the times, initially a new technology will come with a high cost. Like solar was being sold at 18 rupees, 20 rupees per unit. Suppose those were not bought at that point of time. Then you would not have that ecosystem today. So you would have been starting afresh. So initially, whenever new technology comes, there is a need for subsidy to allow the technology to catch up scale, get scale, reduce its prices, develop an ecosystem that reduces prices. Other place where we need subsidy is where the weaker sections are there, who can't take advantage of the benefits of something new which is there, which others are taking. So that's why if you see the structure of our MNRE subsidy, initially we were having for the large utility plants viability gap funds and higher tariffs, all these things were there. But as solar and wind both became more efficient, the tariff reduced, subsidy has gone away from the larger utilities. But as far as the distributed energy is concerned, it is still costly for some, not costly for others. So even this rooftop program, the new program which we are coming out with to address the weaknesses in the old program. One thing we are bringing in, see, a person, a commercial or an industrial or a person with a 10 kilowatt roof structure pays a tariff of 8 rupees, 9 rupees. His solar energy will be 4 rupees. He doesn't need subsidy. You don't need to, that is an incentive in itself. But a person, a small 1 kilowatt house, he is paying a tariff of 4 rupees, 3 rupees. So he won't go for solar. I mean, those are the larger numbers. But there we need the subsidy. And subsidy in the long run cannot be a mass, cannot feed a mass movement kind of thing. Like you can't have 500 gigawatts, 100 gigawatts of renewable running on subsidy. The exchequer can't afford that kind of subsidy. I don't want to talk about oil and all that is a historic thing which has been going on. But there also attempt has been there to reduce the subsidies both in the oil, like now the automatic pricing is the daily pricing. So that subsidies are going on from diesel, petrol. Even gas, surrendering of, and see the difference between now the subsidized and non-subsidized domestic gas is coming down. There's a because it's not sustainable in the long run. To have a mass supply of goods subsidy based, you have to have targeted groups which you need to subsidize and you should subsidize. And new technologies if you want to bring in, like battery needs a subsidy now. Because now if we don't bring in battery manufacturing and battery storage, again we'll miss the bus like we missed the solar panel bus. So this is the basic broad idea. Each sector then you have to analyze separately. But I would like to analyze it on these two parameters only. Sure. And one more thing, the Green Cess Fund which you said, Green Cess Fund is no longer there. It's gone.
Poonam, are the risks that emerging economies are facing any different from the risks that developed countries have faced when they've been investing in renewables?
I think a lot of the risks are similar, perhaps maybe in developing countries in the earlier stage, but a lot of risks are still similar. For example, I did speak of the risks of funding small projects, newer technologies. As far as financiers are concerned, the concerns will be the same. Coming to the question of public funding and what is the role of public funding in increasing the market size here. There is a lot of interest, and we just heard also that India is one of the forerunners in energy transition. So there's a lot of interest of international funding in supporting this energy transition in India and other emerging economies as well. And given the conversations we've had with public funders, what is key is the institutional structure, or what kind of institutions, institutional structures are there in these economies to be able to channel this international public funding. So are there institutions or specialized cells within institutions that are geared to handle this public funding? Are there specialized teams who understand these new technologies, are able to structure products for funding such projects? What are the risk management systems? So really they're looking for specialized expertise and specialized structures which are geared to attract and therefore house these public funds which can be pulled into the country for such funding.
So the question before all of us is, should India have a green bank? David, why is IREDA is one? Can we have more IREDAs? David, how long will the energy transition take? Or let me put, many people ask this question, let me put it differently. Will we know when the energy transition is over?
As I was saying earlier, we're going to be transitioning for the rest of our lives and for the rest of our kids, grandkids, great-grandkids. The energy system will always be transitioning. Now, we're in a period of particular dynamicism and challenge as well, but certainly opportunities. The question about why are we so slowly moving into renewables, I actually think a little bit with your opening framing, Arunabha, about you could either perceive it as too slowly or too quickly.
Why don't we transition you to a different microphone?
Transition to this microphone. Thank you. Are we moving slowly and quickly? I say that in some sense, especially when you look at renewables from beyond hydro. Hydro we've always had, or large, some parts of the world have had large parts of hydro. But you see the base of what we're starting from solar and wind, it's an incredibly small base. So some of the increases on solar in particular, this is a solar revolution we're under. Now, if you look at societal objectives, certainly the climate challenge shared by all of us, but air pollution, other kinds of objectives, we are moving too slowly. We are not getting to those levels that can have the appreciable difference on the overall emissions number. I mentioned a 1.4% increase in emissions last year. We're moving too slowly on renewables. Renewables are such an important part of the, certainly important part of the equation more generally. I feel like we are in the midst of this revolution. We're in the midst of this clean energy revolution, certainly renewables revolution, solar PV revolution. I think we'll see that. We're certainly looking at that. Paolo's forecasts into the future from the IEA, others who have looked at this issue. It's an incredibly exciting dynamic time to be involved in this area. There's, of course, lots of money to be made. There's lots of opportunity to be made by progress in a lot of different places in the world, in India, but a variety of other countries going forward. Now, part of how we move even quicker are the price signals, certainly fossil fuel subsidy reform, those kinds of things to make sure the price signals are in place to really move this going forward. I think there's some tipping points here as well. We're already starting to see some of those tipping points achieved with cost parity and some of the different kinds of renewables. I think we'll see even more of that. Electric vehicles is another one of those technologies that we're on the cusp of this revolution in the numbers looking forward. So it's an incredibly dynamic time period. So I think we'll know it when we see it because we're already in it, and I think it'll become even more apparent that we're in the midst of this this real revolution, this real heart of the transition right now.
Rather than ask, rather than go to the audience for another question, I'm going to actually pose a question to the audience. Yesterday, those of you who were with us witnessed a debate where the motion was, this House believes that India's energy transition is inevitable. And after that spirited debate, the ayes had it. The answer was yes, largely. The question I'm posing back to all of you, if you've been paying attention, is India's energy transition any different than other emerging economies? So the proposition is India's energy transition is different from other emerging economies. Those in favor say aye. Those in favor, those who oppose say no. So is this, again, we are not getting sufficient votes. This is a failed exercise.
We can have a next workshop on this.
Any more ayes? Okay, so I don't know which way the vote went. Okay, let me put another proposition to you. The risks that India faces in its energy transition are different from other emerging economies. That's the proposition. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Okay, I still don't. So here's yeah, either we are too hesitant to exercise our vote.
Some voices with yes and no both.
The reason I'm asking this,
Awareness on the emerging economies may not be there. That may be the reason.
so that's right. So okay, let me put a final question to you. Assume you were an investor in renewables, and you have, say, 100 megawatts invested in India already. So you have a fair idea of the good, the bad, and the ugly. With that experience in India, would you go and invest in South Africa, or Indonesia, or Vietnam, or Argentina, or Mexico? Okay, so someone who said no has to stand up and say why, and someone who said yes has to stand up and say why. Who said no? Okay, so please explain why the experience in India is not sufficient for you to take a bet in other emerging economies.
I'll just give you an example of Vietnam. So Vietnam opened up with FIT in April 2017. And they gave a 9.35 cent of FIT, so the whole world rushed there. They did not meet adequate preparation. It's a 50,000 megawatt economy. North and South Vietnam, they have no clue about connectivity. MOIT, which is a lead ministry for processing the proposals, they have approved 4,000 megawatt of proposals now. Last month, PM has sought for a report whether we should go ahead because the national plan is 850 megawatt by 2019. So with this kind of regulatory uncertainty, part A, there is no really vendor base in Vietnam per se. There is no perfect regulatory mechanism. They have no clue as to when the module will come at the port, in which category or which classification it will be. So it will be very inadequate preparations.
Sure. Okay. Someone said yes. Despite all those challenges, someone wants to go and invest in Vietnam or Mexico or Argentina. So whoever said yes, could one person stand up and explain why the Indian experience is sufficient for you to take a bet somewhere else? Suddenly we've turned conservative.
I did turn conservative after this comment, but I will give you an example of things that are happening in Africa, and especially in the DRE space. The learnings that we have garnered, the pilots that we have sort of are running over here in India, are actually finding great use in African countries, especially Nigeria and Kenya. These are the two countries that I'm talking about. The conditions in terms of regulatory aspects or other things may not be as perfect or as advanced, but because they are not perfect, they're also open to these ideas, and especially when it comes to policy and regulation, they are much more sort of a little bit ahead in the distance in accepting these new ideas and experimenting with that. So the movement on regulation and policy in Nigeria and Kenya is more progressive, if I could use that word. So I think,
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. We started this session post-lunch lethargy, but we were triggered in the conversation with Mr. Kumar's and Mr. Turk's presentations of what's going on in India and how the Indian experience is critical to the world's energy transition. And then through the panel, we heard about subsidy reform, the role of public money, the importance of this being a people's movement. Whenever I go to a conference or a panel discussion, I like to ask myself, did I learn something new in this session or in this conference? And if I were to pose that same question right now, to me the learning, maybe I knew it or maybe it's just reinforced, is that we are not alone in what we are trying to do. As much as we think we are such a complex economy that we are sui generis, we are not alone. We have the same kind of policy uncertainties that another country might have. We might have to learn something from business models being developed elsewhere. And I think this is where I would commend the International Energy Agency for its outreach to emerging economies. And I would commend the government of India for a forthcoming piece of mine is on the India's soft power on climate change, where I'm arguing that we've moved from the power of resistance to a power of example at home. And we must move to a power of leadership abroad. So this combination of what India is learning or mislearning or unlearning at home, and what the IEA knows and learns through its analysis of other countries, and the institutions here, NRDC, IISD, CEEW, other research institutions, we need to come together because we are not alone. So let's join hands in this transition. It's going to take a while. Thank you very much.